Okay.
Great, great, thanks.
That's cool again.
Lovely. So yeah, like at times you'll kind of sense I don't entirely fully know what we're doing here, and that's probably a fair accusation. But we're trying to build an identity and sort of a plan around like what we're doing in the kind of medium to long term. So we have some very generous donors who have donated us now not one but two exoskeletons. So now we have a second one, and I'll explain how we're going to kind of get a little bit more use out of that. And we've chosen the Eksobionics Ekso NR, mostly because of its versatility as a rehab device. It just offers a little bit more, and it's particularly considering the scope of patients we have. So at the end, and it's largely for a lot of the people that are present in person here, so I'm sorry to the onliners, but we're going to have like patient demo in the suit. We're going to talk about some of the features and how we use them, and what we're trying to achieve with people, and particularly the client in question. So it's more like a second generation exoskeleton. So what, why is the second generation? Because there's a little bit more smartness to how the robot works. It's able to detect user intention a little bit more. So stepping is controlled, through gesture and lean, but also if the patient works within the suit, it will pull back in real time and allow them to work or allow them to move within the constraints of a robot, obviously. Still. So it's also compatible with muscle stimulation, and we have that unit. So there must be a hander, so a person can't walk solo or independently in the Eksobionics one, compared to say maybe like the Rex or the Rewalk exoskeletons, where they're more pitched at independent users being able to walk around like their community or their home with it. It needs a walking aid, so we have like either a frame, two crutches, or a stick, depending on what you want to achieve. It's only cleared to walk indoors, and they don't let you take it outside. And then there's all the kind of standard, like you see it across most exoskeletons, there's usually some degree of contraindication, and we can discuss them if needs be when we're talking about it. So the program runs, I always end up talking too much on each slide. I'm running out of time, so feel free to rein me in, anyone, if they have to. So the program is run out at the School of Health and Human Performance in DCU. So there isn't a medical school in the university, which is interesting. So we don't have a physiotherapy degree or a medical degree or occupational therapy. So the disciplines we're looking at are athletic therapy and training, sports science, and then like biomechanical engineering, and those kind of schools would have an interest in what we're doing. But there's not a totally natural fit for a clinical program like this, seeing neurological patients in a university like this, because it doesn't really have a school of health. Apart from there is a school of nursing and psychology, so there is some overlap. But the research group, would certainly more from the angle of sports and more high level performance. There is expertise in like biomechanics, exercise physiology, muscle physiology, and all the things you see listed there on the slide. And then the operation space, and we're in the space where we run the program out of. It's a teaching space, so there's often students. There is athletic therapy and training clinics run out of here. So we have high level athletes rehabbing alongside our neuro patients, which makes for an interesting kind of combination of sort of types of people you see in the room, So the program came about, the donors were introduced to DCU through Mark Pollock. People may or may not be aware of Mark. Mark is paralyzed. He's just one of these exceptional people that arrives and is unfortunate enough to have something like a spinal cord injury, but through his own drive and his just high ability, manages to make things happen, make things change, and possibly drive on like spinal cord rehab, spinal cord research, because he's driven to do so for obvious reasons. So Mark has introduced the donors to DCU, who have introduced the suit, and DCU then, the university, funds my position to run the program. So obviously Mark then has he works with a lot of sort of research sites around the world, out of Russia, USA, and some other sites in Europe. So there's a big interesting network of people doing really interesting things in neuro rehab. So then for fundraising within DCU, we have what's called the Educational Trust, and they raise money for programs. So we're one of their key programs for the next 5 years. and they will have dedicated fundraisers who will be trying to generate revenue for us to help fund staffing, replacement robots, more exciting robots, more interesting technology. And then obviously we have a big comms platform in DCU, there's a whole comms department. So we had an opportunity to like generate a little bit of media, generate a bit of presence. So there was kind of news segments, one of the like a late night talk show in Ireland, for anyone online who isn't aware what the Late Late Show is. We've had some radio spots, we've had some web-based outlets like wired.com and Brainstorm. So if you Google them, you'll see some stories around us. So the media reach to date is around 1.3, 1.4 million views at this point. So plenty of people know about us in Ireland. So we kind of, it was an easy way for us to advertise and get our name out there. And of course, the result of that was that we had a hell of a lot of referrals. So we've about, like, we'll talk about some stats later. I think we've got 145 people or so on the books. And that's without us ever trying to go and find someone. So we're running a clinical program out of a university that doesn't have a clinical kind of school. So we have a slight identity crisis, and we're trying to work through that. So we're not part of any HSC pathway of care, and I'm sure on Saol will understand when I say that, how that feels to be there sort of out in limbo, but serving a lot of people that really need help. We're not a research facility solely because we're, you know, the donor's vision was to get as much access to this technology to as many people as needed it. And that was the brief that DCU fulfilled by bringing me in. My skills would be on the clinical side rather than on developing a research facility. But that's now happening in tandem and in parallel. And then we probably are mostly a clinical service, but we probably won't survive in a university being only a clinical service. So there's no clear identity for us, and that there's a challenge there in running something like this in the community, in an institution like this. So we serve the chronically paralyzed people that are community dwelling. And I say chronically because there is a reasonable rehab pathway in the acute and subacute phases of injury in Ireland. There is obvious places to go. Unfortunately, if you have like a severe catastrophic brain injury, it's a lot longer to wait than, say, I don't know if Chris is still online there, but the spinal cord injury pathway is probably a little bit better. The waiting times aren't as long, and the inpatient rehab is probably a little bit longer. Probably less of the intensity than he would have gotten his 35 days in the States, but not bad. Okay, great, thanks, Matt. Our subject is ready to walk, but I need another 15 minutes, Chloe, if you're okay to wait, just to keep talking, you know. So I sort of mentioned the donor's vision, and then like to the clinical team here, like the vision, and where kind of after I've been here for like 2.5, 3 years. We had COVID in the middle, so we lost a bit of momentum, but you know, like, where do I stand with this kind of, as a clinician with lots of experience in neuro rehab, like, where do I stand with this kind of technology? And there's like a big shift has happened in my thinking. So like, I would like to see walking as a standard of care considered to be a standard of care for paralysis, that everyone would and should have access to regular walking and beyond the kind of acute and subacute phases of rehab. And it's about, like, the reason being that it's about ongoing rehab, because as Chris said in his talk, you know, you don't finish your rehab at 5 or 6 months or 3 months or however long you get. It takes a lot longer, particularly for someone like him, that being completely tetraplegic. Certainly a year, 2 years, there's lots of change still happening. It's about health management then, and body shape preservation, and then secondary complication management. And he, like, it was a nice segue to come from his talking to mine, because he mentioned lots of the issues like bowel and bladder and spasticity and all the things that are challenging on a daily basis as a spinal cord injured person, that being up and walking can have a positive effect on. So, and then also one of the big things that's changed for me is the value that a service user would put on the option to come in and be able to walk once or twice a week. And we see it in huge demand. So not only have we got high numbers on our waiting list, the people that come through want to continue to keep walking. They want to come in once a week. They want to access it. There's a really positive feeling for them to be doing it. And for everyone, it's a little bit different, the reason why they want to come in, but everybody wants to keep walking. And that's really the important, so really the important thing. And then ultimately we probably see like that we will become like a center of excellence for like advanced rehabilitation technologies. So not only exoskeletons, but what other interesting, new and exciting products can we layer on if we get the right funding that are a little bit more game changing. And, you know, those kind of products won't be integrated into healthcare systems for a long time, because the innovation is always far ahead of the research. And you know, healthcare systems are probably quite militantly, you know, evidence-based practice. There's no evidence, they won't introduce it, and there's kind of a mismatch there when people who are paralyzed want to try things and they need some space to do that in. You know, I think there's an interesting opportunity for us there to give people a chance to try things that they wouldn't in any other setting. And then DCU's kind of overarching motto is changing lives and transforming society. So in that way, we fit in really well, because we probably have, you know, we get to change the individuals' lives who come in here, and we have lots of interesting stories. Starting with the program for so many people has been a catalyst to drive them on into kind of sourcing other parts of rehab, or getting back to the gym, or, you know, pushing on their kind of their participation in life a little bit more. Kind of just the activity coming in here once a week has changed other areas and other aspects of their life. So we have a really positive kind of knock-on effect to their whole the whole like picture of that patient. And then transforming society is a little bit more probably pie in the sky, a little bit more optimistic. But like I said, it's about changing the mentality around how we manage paralysis and what kind of value we put on walking. I mean, like, it took a long time for society to accept the wheelchair, and now it's really standard that ramps are in new buildings. Standard builds have to have door widths to accommodate wheelchairs. Light switches have to be set at a lower height so that wheelchair users can. These are standard building regulations. So we've come all the way into like being highly accepting of the wheelchair, but almost, in my opinion, possibly maybe a little bit too accepting to not put the same level of value on a wheelchair user to walk. Because like, the elephant in the room is that sitting for 12 or 16 hours a day can be catastrophically bad for the body. So whereas, like, how do we manage that mismatch, and how do we change opinions a little bit? Even though we kind of want people to be very accepting and accommodating for wheelchairs, it's a bit of it's a rock and a hard place situation. So basically, any condition that has an upper motor neuron lesion with any level of walking impairment, we have people who walk without aids who get benefit from using the exoskeleton, and we have people who are full-time wheelchair users, high tetraplegics, or moderate kind of stroke or traumatic brain injuries, MS, that would use it as well. So basically, any level of paralysis could benefit in some way from using it. So we're aiming to grow to around 150 to 200 walking sessions per month. At the last month, we did about 103. So we didn't have 2 suits, that was off 1 suit. We had the second suit for about 4 days in that month. And now we're building to running 2 suits in parallel, and building to hopefully in around 150 to 200 sessions a month. We've about 140-ish on the waiting list. We screened 87 of those. Some of those people are waiting, they're unwell, or there's other issues going on, they can't get to us, they're waiting for summer holidays, that kind of thing. So those people will trickle in over time. We've had screening fails of around 16 people. So that was people with too much body deformity, like contracture at the hip, knee, or ankle, to be stood in the way. Like, an exoskeleton stands you pretty aggressively vertically. It can only accommodate around 17 degrees flexion at the hip, 12 degrees flexion at the knee, and you have to be able to achieve plantar grade. Now, hopefully there's no Eksobionics trainers or people on. We've taken liberties at the ankles and put some people who probably maybe shouldn't be in it, but have been able to successfully walk with ankle contractures, which is great that there's a little bit more power there. And what better way to improve an ankle contracture than to walk it out, you know? But the 16 people still haven't, which I think is very unfortunate. A lot of those 16 are kind of adolescents, 18 to 25, who've had a neurological either lesion since birth, or maybe were young when they had a spinal cord injury and have grown with the neurology and have developed too much body deformity through those growth years to be able to be stood vertically. So there's an interesting opportunity there, I think, for younger people who have neurological problems to be stood and walked earlier in their life, to maintain the body shape, to be able to continue to stand and walk into adulthood, and avail of, like, you know, if I'm 5 today and have a spinal cord injury, what's going to be available when I'm 40, you know, to be able to avail of those. And there's a risk that we leave a group of people behind because we didn't preserve enough body shape to be able to walk. There's an emphasis on healthcare systems and being able to preserve sufficient body shape to sit in a wheelchair, because that's the optimal mode of transport and mobility. But we don't necessarily aggressively pursue the verticality of standing and walking and maintain that as healthcare providers. That's just the way, but the innovation, the option was never there. what it is now. So we have a pediatric waiting list for when we get a pediatric exoskeleton, and that's where we're at. So probably there's a little bit of innovation, hopefully, in the service model that isn't done in other places. So we have 2 suits. We have myself, a full-time staff member, and Matt, who will walk Chloe today, a full-time staff member, and then we kind of have interns and physio students who rotate through to support us as well. But that means we couldn't run 2 suits full-time in parallel without other people being trained up. So we train up family members, first of all. So any family member who wants to learn to deliver it for their loved one, we'll teach them, certify them with our certification. So how official that is, I don't know. And they get to come and use the technology then in supervision with us while we're maybe walking somebody else. So we have about, what did I say, 6 graduates to date and about another 4 or 5 kind of learning at the moment. Probably thought that would be easier to get people over the line and comfortable doing that. It's challenging for people, even if you've done maybe 30 or 40 sessions, to be like wholly and fully independent, that you feel happy to leave the room and let them walk and use the technology. And there's a combination of, you know, the walker or the exoskeleton user has to be proficient enough at the walking, and the handler has to be proficient enough at correcting them when they need correcting and stepping in when they need stepping in. And those teams as a pair have to be really strong and solid. And then so Eksobionics only certified physiotherapists or occupational therapists. We've set up a kind of a new handler competency level for science grad, non-physiotherapy disciplines, because that's what we have lots of in DCU, and that's what our interns are. So we have people who can clearly learn to use the technology and are doing it excellently, and then are available on campus because they're maybe in 3rd year, they're going to be here for another year. So we get access to someone for sort of 12 to 15 months after they're trained. Like that would be through an internship. And there's an opportunity then for them to kind of make a few quid in their final year when they're adjacent because they're in lectures, and they come over for an hour and walk a person. So that's kind of continues in the team, which is giving as much access to as many people as we can. And then the screening, we always do a telephone pre-screen just to rule out anything that might disappoint a person straight off the bat. Give them some advice, so you're coming in 3 weeks, you need to get in your standing frame every day so your blood pressure is okay. You need to stretch, be pretty aggressive with your stretching if you think you're particularly tight anywhere, because you don't want to be limiting that way. And then we bring them in and we do a bed assessment top to toe, make sure that they're going to be able to be stood in the exoskeleton. And then we do a trial and stand. And then if they're successful in that, they go on the waiting list and we will bring them in when we can bring them in. So that's kind of, and then we get about 16 sessions when the person is brought in. One of those, the assessment session, and then 15 training sessions ish. But there's no, we're not particularly strict with the rules. So I've then qualified to train the trainer level. So any sites nationally that purchase an Eksobionics exoskeleton, I can deliver the training, or therapists can come here to be trained to use it. And ultimately, what we're looking to build is an army of expert users, so handlers and walkers, so pilots of the robotic exoskeletons and handlers of the robotic exoskeletons. Build up a network, build up an army, so that as this becomes more prevalent, they become more economically viable. People can walk, we get access to more and more people nationwide. Until everyone who needs a robot has one, but it's probably a little bit optimistic. So where do we get our funding? So philanthropy is our probably most successful through the educational trust I mentioned. So we've 113,500 euros to date, plus 2 exoskeletons, and to the cost of those. So in or around another 380,000 on top of that, and to fund those. So we've been pretty successful in that way. We are about to start requesting support and contribution from service users, particularly people who have cases that have settled or have high levels of means, but it won't be a limiting factor. Anyone, we're asking, it's an honesty bar policy. Anyone that can afford to pay, we're asking them to pay to help us keep ongoing access for everyone. And then the other big obvious funding stream will be research, and we haven't had any successes in generating any research funding yet. But it's probably something we haven't pushed till about this year. And as anyone who's done a research application or calls knows, it's a slow process, and the calls, from the call coming out to funding delivery, it can be 18 months to 2 years. So as we're looking, we have to be patient. So we've obviously then generated some collaborations. We have a new one that hopefully we're making today with the team here on Saol, and so maybe some of our international colleagues, which is nice. So locally, in terms of research, University College Dublin is on the other side of the city in Dublin here, and Olive Lennon does quite a lot of research. She's one of the physiotherapy lecturers there. She's the head and the lead on the PROGATE study, which is a stroke study in exoskeletons, which is looking at like electroencephalography measuring of the patient response. So looking at the neurophysiological mechanisms that are underpinning very, very, very early mobilization after stroke, like day 2, day 3, day 4. It's a really interesting study. Look it up. So the University of Ulster, through No Barriers, which is another charitable exoskeleton site based up in the northwest of the country. And we take physio master's students then from the UCC School of Physiotherapy, and we have 2 at the moment. So then there's other exoskeleton sites nationally that provide only exoskeleton walking, helpful steps, no barriers. And the IRFU, so it's actually the injured jockeys own that solely now. There's a site up in Belfast that have one. And Step West is a new one that's just come online. They've purchased their exoskeleton, but they haven't got their team in place, or they aren't delivering any sessions, but we will train up their physios if and when they do. So then we've got some of the local industry partners. You've obviously got Eksobionics, and they're kind of like our model, so they're interested in what we do. AccuScience are the Irish distributor for the technology, and then Marsobionics are the first CE marked pediatric exoskeleton on the market. We're in talks with them. So we've obviously got the hospital sites, the neuro hospital sites. You guys obviously are well aware of this, and then some charitable partners that are feeding into we have a PPI group, so a patient and public involvement group. It's a real requirement for research that there is patient involvement. We're hearing every day what the patients want. We feel like we're pretty tuned into it. We formalize that, and we have members of charities, so like usually liaison and kind of outreach workers from MS Society and Spinal Injuries Ireland. We have some service users, and we have some family members of service users sitting on that group, and we're gonna sit and have a meeting with that group soon. It'll be our first. So I'm really taking too long. I told you I speak too much on each slide. So just in terms of research, then what are our thoughts, or what's the thinking? So I'm kind of doing my doctoral thesis in parallel, running the program. So, but it's a professional doctorate, so it's really interesting, and it's kind of a few things that were said in the last talk made me realize I'd made the right choice. So a professional doctorate is not a PhD, so you don't get the PhD letters, you get the doctor, but it's, a PhD is research, and that informs practice. A professional doctorate is expert practice, so expert practitioners with lots of experience undertaking research, kind of identifying gaps in their field and issues and problems in their field, and then academifying those problems and kind of figuring out how to ask the right questions and how to research that. That's the kind of journey I'm on. I'm in year 1 of 4. And in the beginning, and this was what I think there was something was touched on, you said that actually, Reinhardt, around subjectivity of experience and subjectivity of benefit. So what we're looking at is the patient experience literature, and we'll be discussing with our now expert pilots. So that's the beauty of having built up so many sessions and so many users, is that we have the perspective of people with 70, 80, 90, 100 walking sessions completed. And that's a different experience to, say, someone who's standing and walking for the first time. Discovering what it is that keeps bringing those people back, why they find walking so compelling and so interesting for them. And then seeing if the healthcare models, the neuro assessment, is measuring the things that are happening to those guys. I'm pretty sure someone isn't going to say my range of movement feels better, which is what, things like those objective measures that we're great at physios is measuring. But maybe that's not what's actually the way the person's benefiting. And it may just be psychological, but it may be more, and it's to try and figure out what's underpinning the benefits for the people that come through and access the service. Yeah, we're looking at some other research opportunities. Any future hires, we're hoping to bring in specifically PhDs or postdocs to kind of grow the research. We're looking at some of the kind of grants awards in Ireland. We're looking at specifically, a lot of those we're looking at for the pediatric exoskeleton. So we have another funding pledge from another donor for 50,000 to fund the pediatric exoskeleton, but we're looking to build a clinical team around that, and the money for that's going to have to come to research successes. Is the kind of, that's the line in the sand. Any future hires will be, like we said, will be research. So we have the Marsobionics exoskeleton identified. We're kind of engaged with them. They're interested in what our questions are. And my questions, the interesting questions for me, are all around those people that have the excessive body deformity. Like, for example, in muscular dystrophy, scoliosis directly correlates with coming off your feet. So as soon as you come off your feet, scoliosis starts to develop. If we can artificially keep a person on their feet, or artificially through exoskeleton walking, can we limit the formation of scoliosis? So is the scoliosis being driven by the sitting, or is it being driven by the neuromuscular weakness? We don't know for sure, but we want to explore that question to artificially keep the person walking twice, 3 times a week through the parents, who then will train up in our model of friends and family, and keep them walking. So we have everything in place for that, except for the researchers. Then obviously within the school, we've loads of things we can, the kind of predictable stuff we could look at. But there is probably a good skill, a very high level of quality and biomechanics assessment here. So there is some interest around that. And then for me, like motor control, like principles of neurology, principles of neuro-rehab are also quite interesting. But we have to wait and see if any of the patient reporting kind of feeds into this in terms of motor, control of movement or ease of movement or improved quality of movement subjectively, and then maybe if we can figure out the physiology underpinning that. And then some combination stuff. So some of the skill sets that lie in the school here, like coaching and exercise training, and then maybe linking with hospitals or other universities to look at like supplementing through pharmacology or other kind of innovations like that. So I suppose I've mentioned screening fails, and they're like my big area of interest. It's too hard to assess a person and tell them they can't even trial the suit on the bed because they have levels of contraction that they didn't even realize were there when you put them on a hard plinth, and they probably didn't have huge implications for the person that it was an issue, but their body's now unable to be verticalized properly in the alignment that an exoskeleton demands, which is just, I guess there's no need for it. So we're looking at Horizon, we're looking at European calls as well then. Why we realize we're running out of time and we all want to see the robot. So just in terms of next steps then, so we're looking at interested principal investigators internally in the university and externally. We're happy to do it external PIs to lead and explore the research a little bit with us, grow more sessions, incorporate more research, get more funding, obviously. And then ultimately, like the growth is that influencing society, healthcare policy, and having an influence on people's practice, and saying, that maybe a first line of thinking should be an exoskeleton or robotic walking rather than an adjunct or an afterthought, or you can do it after your rehab, or what I mean, we don't have the resources or whatever it might be. It's more incorporated into practice. So now we will have a look at the suit, I guess, have a little chat about the features. My German colleagues who are very experienced in Eksobionics, please feel free to support what I say with your own experiences of how it works and what it does. And guys, this is Chloe, who probably didn't realize there's going to be so many people here, I suspect. But we'll discuss. Chloe's really nice because she can walk. So we're going to bring the robot through all of its range of features. So we're going to start.
Just to the people on the call, we're going to, thank you to Ronan. We're going to stop the call here and stop the recording.